Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's presentation, Data Management for Hybrid and Multi-Cloud, a four-step journey, brought to you by DataStax. I would like to introduce you to our presenter, Robin Schumacher. Robin has spent the last 30 years working with enterprise databases and leading product management teams. Robin started and led the product management team at MySQL 3 years before they were bought by Sun, the largest open source acquisition in history, and then they were bought by Oracle. He also started and led the product management team at Imbarsato Technologies, where he was the #1 and led the product management team, which was the #1 IPO in 2000. Robin is the author of 3 database performance books and frequent speaker at industry events. Robin holds a BS, an MA, and a PhD.
Thanks very much. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Again, my name is Robin Schumacher, and I'll be taking you through today's webinar, Data Management for Hybrid and Multi-Cloud. Hearing my bio and hearing 30 years makes me feel old, but I just like to think that I'm seasoned instead of old. Let me go ahead and jump right into the agenda because we do have a lot of ground to cover. So we'll do a quick welcome and introduction for those of you maybe that are new to DataStax and or the general arena of cloud computing, and then we're going to walk through some concepts for both hybrid and multi-cloud to make sure that the terms and everything that I'm using during the presentation are understood by everybody and we're all on the same page. After that, I'm going to take you through the 4-step success plan that we have seen customers here at DataStax implement. And I want to stress this, that this is not some sort of a theoretical type of thing that we're presenting today. As you'll see in a few moments, the majority of our customers are using our software in the cloud and in hybrid cloud fashion. And we have observed a very noticeable pattern of success for the companies that do this very, very well. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And then at the very end, we'll do a quick wrap up. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with just a quick welcome and introduction. For those of you that may be new to DataStax, just a little bit of information here. We were founded in 2010. We're a database software provider, specifically in the arena of NoSQL and operational databases. We are an open source company. Everything we do here is built on proven open source foundations. And we are absolutely a leader in the database market. Doesn't matter really which analyst group you look at or media, they'll basically tell you the same thing. And specifically when it comes to hybrid and multi-cloud. And on that subject, I want to talk a little bit about just the architecture that's necessary to pull that off and kind of where we've come from. So I wasn't around in the 70s, probably most of you weren't, in terms of how things got kicked off with the mainframe, very centralized applications, but maybe some of you were with me in the 1990s when Oracle and Sybase and Microsoft SQL Server and everything kind of began to rise to prominence. And there you had the semi-distributed applications and more in the client server arena. But today, we are absolutely in the radically or widely distributed cloud computing paradigm. And this can be done either in the cloud, which is becoming more prominent, or on-premise, or a combination thereof. And you want to make darn sure that when you're going and moving into this area of modern architectures, modern application development, that you're doing so with the proper foundation. And that's really where DataStax comes into play. So as we'll again talk about here in a couple moments, there's nothing magic about taking a database and putting it into the cloud and thinking, oh, well, now it's a cloud database. Instead, you need something that's really been built from the ground up to exploit all of the benefits and nuances that the cloud computing offers. And that's really what the DataStax platform is. And this is why when we hold our various developer days out in public, that when we do our multi-cloud demo that has a single application and a single database running across multiple clouds and on-premise, and we begin to actually put bullets in the head of the various parts of that cluster that may exist on a single cloud provider or a single on-premise data center, and the application doesn't miss a beat. People are just blown away. They think that it's some sort of smoke and mirrors, that we're somehow fooling them, and we're absolutely not. And if you want to see this for yourself, I'd encourage you to go to our website. We had our Accelerate conference a couple months ago, and we did this very demo that I'm describing here, and you can see it in action if you go back and look at the actual recorded keynote that again is on our website.
Hey, Robin, I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but it does look like your screen sharing has froze. If you could just stop sharing and reshare your screen real quick.
Okay. All right. Are you seeing the actual, what are you seeing now, I guess?
I'm just seeing the title screen from GoToWebinar. If you
Okay.
could share your screen.
Now let me know what you're seeing here.
It is still the GoToWebinar screen.
It's saying it's paused, and I don't know if that's something that's on your side or my side here.
That would be something on your side.
Yeah, I'm moving through the screen here, but I'm not. We'll do another stop showing, and then let me get out of this. And then we will attempt to do this again. Now?
Yes, I see your screen now.
All right. Hopefully this is not something that has to do with GoToMeeting or whatever. Let me know if you're seeing a cloud hybrid architecture slide.
I am still only seeing the welcome and introduction slide.
Yeah, something's not happening here when it goes into full screen mode, and I'm not sure if it's, again, something that's having to do with, how about, what are you seeing now?
DataStax uniquely, oh, now I'm seeing cloud and hybrid architecture.
Okay, so something must be happening when I'm going into the full screen mode here. So apologies for those of you watching the webinar. Let me see if I can increase the size of this a little bit and remove. Okay, so apologies. It looks like we're going to have to run this in non-presentation mode. So I'm assuming now, if I move, you're seeing DataStax uniquely suited for the cloud?
Yes.
Okay. And let me continue to move this along. All right, so now when DataStax?
Yes.
Okay. All right, again, apologies everybody for that. Let me move this down. All right. So in terms of when you should use DataStax software or again, software that's really designed for the cloud, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that you should throw out all your other databases and instead just run DataStax software. I've been, again, as was mentioned earlier, a database administrator developer for a lot of years, and there are a lot of good databases out there designed for particular purposes. And ours was absolutely designed around the purpose of handling the types of applications that I'm going to describe here. And so if you're considering DataStax software, you want to kind of go down through a very short checklist that I've got here on the screen, and it runs with the acronym CARDS. Starts off with contextual, just meaning that you want an operational database that's able to handle multiple workloads, meaning transactional, search, analytical workloads, perhaps in memory, things like that. And one that also offers the ability to handle multiple data models or formats. So maybe you're using a tabular form for certain parts of your application. Maybe a graph is suited for a different type of application, document, things like that. And so that's where really contextual comes into play. Available means 100% available. We're not talking something that's highly available like you will get with certain master-slave designs or multi-master designs where you can have failover and what have you. We're talking about something that never goes down. And I've been here at DataStax 8 years. We've had customers with us that long, and customers who have not experienced a single second of outage during that entire 8 years due to the DataStax platform. And so that's absolutely something you could obtain with the software, and something that is becoming more common in terms of a requirement for modern applications. Real time, this just means operational. You need data right now in the moment, versus something that maybe is computed and comes up, every couple minutes or every half hour or something like that. Distributed means that you need to locate copies of your information in multiple physical locations or cloud availability zones or something like that. And maybe you do it for disaster recovery or redundancy purposes. Maybe you do it for performance sake, keeping data very local to the customers in a certain geographic region to ensure they have uniformity where response times are concerned, or maybe you do it for both purposes. But this is something, again, that DataStax really excels in terms of distributing your information very easily everywhere that you need to have it, and ensuring that those copies of data that are everywhere are synchronized with each other. And then lastly, scale. This just means that what you start with today, you can continue to use 5, 10 years from now when your application becomes wildly successful and you're in the hundreds of millions of users and hundreds of terabytes or petabytes or something like that of information. And so that tends to be when you'll want to employ software, again, like DataStax. So how are we able to do this? Well, the foundation of everything we do, I talked about earlier, is open source. And the primary foundation is an open source Apache project called Apache Cassandra. DataStax has been really the primary vendor that has contributed most to the Apache Cassandra project. In fact, mostly 85 to 100% of the code really has come from DataStax, depending on the actual release. And when NoSQL started a number of years ago, there were a little bit of debate in terms of which NoSQL databases were best for scale and some of the things that I just described. But I think really now most people in the know will admit that Cassandra is the #1 NoSQL database when it comes to scale, when it comes to uptime, uniformity of performance. And the reason that it can do this is it is the only NoSQL database left standing that has a masterless architecture, meaning peer-to-peer, meaning all nodes are the same. There is no concept of a master or a slave or a multi-master or something like that. There's no concept of failover, because the system is running, again, in a uniform state, and the various requests are being routed to the various nodes and satisfying those. And should a node go down, it's simply just rerouted to another available node with that particular copy of the data. So this gives us the ability to pull off all of the various requirement satisfactions that I just talked about on the other slide. And again, this is really done from an open source standpoint. We're very good open source stewards, not only with the Cassandra project, but with Apache Spark, with Apache Tinkerpop, which may be another project you might not be familiar with. This is the #1 graph framework that is used by all graph databases in the marketplace today, and we provide right now at least 100% of the code that powers really every graph database in the market, including our own. Now, if you want to get started with software like this, but perhaps you're really not up for open source, you want something that is maybe a little bit more trustworthy with some support or something like that behind it, we have a number of different types of offerings you can use. Our distribution of Apache Cassandra is our mirrored version of open source with our distribution that we do all of the performance testing and scale testing, what have you. It's going to give you all of the no lock-in benefits that open source Cassandra will, but with the safety net of, again, tested software, supported software, and a variety of other different utilities that you won't find in open source. Then, if you're ready to graduate up into some more enterprise components, that's where DataStax Enterprise comes into play. And as, again, was mentioned in my biography, I've been doing open source since 2005, and I have watched a lot of different companies try to cobble together their data platforms from scratch with various open source components, which is kind of depicted there on the left-hand side of the screen. Trust me when I say that it's a losing game. Sooner or later, you will find out that getting in the database business, building what I call your TV sets from scratch, is tough. It's really tough. Far more better to be pound wise and penny foolish and spend a little bit of money to save a whole lot of time and go to your favorite electronics store, pull your flat screen off the shelf, go home, plug it in, and it's going to work for you. And that's exactly what DataStax Enterprise is. Built on the open source foundation of Apache Cassandra, but we add all of the various enterprise components that you're going to need for production systems, including full multi-model support, including graph, advanced performance, so that it's going to run 2, 3, sometimes 4 times faster than open source, built-in management capabilities, built-in self-healing capabilities, integrated analytics, integrated search, advanced forms of replication, the kind of security that you're going to need and want, whether you're running on-premise or in the cloud. All of that is contained within DataStax Enterprise. And for those of you that really want a kind of a hands-off approach, in other words, you not only don't want to be in the database business, you don't want to deal with your databases at all, you can benefit from all of the features and functions of DataStax Enterprise in the cloud or on-premise through our managed services offering, which means that we will do everything for you: installation, backup, store, tuning, upgrades, modeling of your data. We will take on all of that for you so that you don't have to and can just focus on your application development. All right, so with that brief introduction out of the way, let me then move to some concepts and terms that we all want to be familiar with. Okay, I know this is kind of funny, what is the cloud? But believe it or not, sometimes people have a skewed understanding of what the cloud actually is. It's going to be those resources and software, et cetera, that are run by the various cloud providers, essentially data centers done for you by different vendors. Now, when we move to some definitions though, this is where a lot of people get tripped up. So understanding single cloud, that's not such a big deal. Won't even really talk about it. But multi and intercloud oftentimes get confused or conflated together. Multi-cloud is when you have one or more applications that are targeting different cloud providers. So you have application A that uses database A that's, let's say, on Amazon. You have application B and database B that is on the Google Cloud platform, and on down the line. So you're using different cloud providers and different databases, but they don't mix, they don't touch one another. They operate independently. Whereas intercloud, which is probably the term that is least familiar to you, this is where you will have a single application and a particular database that is spanning multiple cloud providers. So again, maybe I have a single database that's running across Microsoft Azure, Google, and Amazon at the same time. And that's what I was talking about earlier with that demo that we do at a lot of our developer days. It is a intercloud demo that has a single database running across the different providers. Why do that? Well, for the same reason that you might run the same database across different data centers. Because as we've seen, and you've seen various media blasts and what have you, cloud providers can go down. And in fact, if you look at the Uptime Institute's latest report on availability, cloud providers are now the number 2, and I'll say it again, the number 2 reason behind downtime. Number 1, no surprises, individual companies own data centers. But right behind them, cloud providers, number 2. So having a database that runs across different clouds, at least I believe, is going to become the norm here in the next few years. And then finally, hybrid cloud. Probably most of you understand this. This is where you have a shared type of agreement arrangement between the investment you've made in your on-premise data centers and one or more cloud providers. Oftentimes we'll see this with customers where they have existing infrastructure that can satisfy their requirements the vast majority of the time, but maybe certain times of the year, maybe during the holiday seasons or whatever else, they need additional infrastructure and they don't want to make that investment and have it just sitting there. So they might burst to the cloud and use the resources in the cloud for a particular period of time and then contract those resources and do away with them once that particular event stops. Now, in terms of the cloud deployment models, let's say you're sitting here and you're thinking, okay, I'm ready to get started. What's really the best way to dip my toes in the water, get my feet wet? By far, the vast majority of folks we see that get started in cloud do so with what we call lifecycle partitioning. And this just simply means that you're starting with some development applications in a particular cloud provider. So you're running all your normal processes, et cetera, on premise, but now we're going to take a couple of budding projects that you have, and we're going to try them out in the cloud and begin to do your development work, get your database resources up and running, et cetera, in one or more cloud providers. Then folks tend to move into application partitioning. This is where you have parts of a particular application running on-premise and then parts in the cloud. So as an example, we have probably the world's largest video game provider, online video game provider. They have all of their security information maintained in a portion of their database that runs on-premise, but then all of their actual gaming information, their leaderboards, all of that info that changes rapidly, etc., they have running in the cloud, again, with our database in a hybrid cloud fashion. Then you have application spanning, which just means now your application in total is running part on-premise and part in the cloud. So it's just spanning both types of environments. Moving on, you have the multi-cloud environment, which I described earlier, different applications and or databases that are running in different cloud providers. And then finally, the intercloud, which has one or more applications, one or more databases that are crisscrossing on-premise investments as well as different cloud providers. And again, personally, I think this will become the most dominant and prominent way of development here, given maybe 3 or so years. In the same way that, for example, when DataStax started 8 or so years ago, data centers, multi-data centers weren't the norm. They are today. I think the multi-cloud provider way and intercloud way of doing things is going to be how most folks will tackle things that are serious about continuous uptime, no vendor lock-in, all of that type of thing. All right, so now let's go ahead and move on to the different patterns that we're seeing from our customers that are becoming very successful, whether it's a hybrid or a multi-cloud type of deployment. And they all face really the same types of challenges when they get started. So first off, make no mistake, your data is going to be your toughest part of your infrastructure layer. A lot of people think it's the application. It's really not, because there's a lot of things that come into play at the data layer that are different than running multiple applications in the cloud. And so you're going to be dealing with some of the same things you face on premise, like scale, high availability, but also instability, as I mentioned earlier. Some of the cloud providers just aren't up to speed with various ways of doing different availability zones, handling outages, all of that type of thing. Then there's going to be the data ownership. So what happens if your cloud provider all of a sudden begins to ratchet up the costs on you, and now you're facing a bill that's 2 or 3 times what it used to be? So you want to try to think about avoiding the vendor lock-in, the creation of data silos, where you have, again, these walls of separation that exist between different types of application and their underlying supported data. Being able to manage the master and transactional information, data about the data, your different sources of truth can become very, again, challenging. And then, as I mentioned earlier, just the cost of it, being able to not only maintain what you have on premise, but being able to smartly ensure that you're doing things the right way when it comes to cloud, because, again, take my word for it, not all cloud vendors are created equal when it comes to how they charge and how they manage your data platforms in the cloud. So the reality check is, I kind of mentioned this earlier, there really is no cloud. It's just really someone else's data center. The same thing applies when it comes to a database. There is no magic that happens when you take a typical relational database and take your pick, Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL, whatever, and put it in the cloud. It's still going to have the same strengths and weaknesses that it had on premise. And this is, again, why you need to smartly look in the beginning at your underlying data foundation that you're choosing for your hybrid or multi-cloud deployments, because this becomes extraordinarily important as you begin to, again, step through these things that we're about to walk through now. So if we look back at all of our customers here at DataStax that have done this, again, exceedingly well, we see them following kind of a 4-step process. There's an opportunistic phase, a standardizing phase, a rationalizing phase, and then finally a tweaking or an optimizing phase. So let's begin to walk through these now. If you start off in the opportunistic phase, this is kind of a duh slide, where this is kind of how most things get started when you're dealing with new technology anyway, right? You've got a particular project that you're going to, it's going to be your test bed. It's going to be your pet project that you're going to see, can we do this or not? when it comes to, again, fill in the blank, where it's hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, or whatever else. This typically resides in some line of business. It tends to be shielded from the rest of the enterprise at that particular point in time. And so the good thing about starting this way that we've again seen customers do is that it doesn't require a lot of investment. You don't have to get multiple signatures on up the executive food chain to make this happen. Instead, for a very small investment, and sometimes, in the case, at least with us, your cost for your development project is zero, and I do mean zero. The risk here is that it sometimes will take a while to ramp up, especially if you're dealing with new technology, existing staff that maybe is resistant to new technology, or there's a fairly strenuous learning curve involved. It can take a while for any fruit to actually show itself in this particular phase. And so again, I want to go back in terms of the hybrid or a multi-cloud tip. You want to choose your data foundation wisely, because what you start with here, you oftentimes will begin to replicate and move throughout the rest of the organization. And when you're dealing with hybrid cloud or multi-cloud, the architecture matters. And if you look at the vast majority, if not all of the other databases that are out there, whether they're relational or not, they're going to be either in a master-slave design or a multi-master design, where you have certain machines that are devoted to write operations and others that are devoted to read operations and or handling failover should the particular master fail. And it doesn't matter, again, whether you're looking at some of the tried and true vendors from the relational days or some of the newest vendors, the NoSQL ones like Microsoft Cosmos DB or Amazon DynamoDB, etc. They all operate in this fashion, whereas DataStax and its underlying foundation, Apache Cassandra, do not. Again, we have a masterless architecture, peer-to-peer, all nodes are the same. There is no concept of the typical failover or anything like that. They all work uniform in conjunction in a divide and conquer style, so that you can have uniform linearity with your scale, with your performance, and that constant uptime. So again, choose wisely here, because again, what you start with is typically what's going to be replicated out. And if you begin to hit walls throughout, as you begin to roll through these different 4 steps, oftentimes you have to back up, and that can be costly. So then you go to phase 2. So let's say you've proven your particular project out in its opportunistic phase. Now you're going to move on to the standardizing phase, where you're trying to begin to now take the various applications and reduce them, maybe have less number of applications running, less sources of truth, where you're beginning to integrate your data together and streamline some of the processes so that they become a little bit more uniform. So you're taking some of your learnings that you had in the opportunistic phase, and you're beginning to now hit the ground running a little bit faster. You're beginning to more rapidly develop your applications, which is all well and good. The danger here now, though, is you begin to work in a standard walls going up kind of fashion, where again, you begin to create various data silos, where you might have data that is shared between different applications. They're having to be maintained by different applications, and they don't talk to one another. And this can get out of hand fairly quickly and can become fairly costly if you don't watch yourself. So what we've seen people do to avoid this, the vast majority of our customers are moving to microservices architectures, where it's really kind of a hand-in-glove fit for what we're talking about here. So let's say you're developing an e-commerce application. You'll have a particular microservice that's handling some transactional flows, user profile management, another one that's handling shopping cart, and on down the line. And these will then plug into your particular database, singular database that's going to be running. And again, with DataStax Enterprise, those can be using different data models. Those can be targeting different areas of the country. Take your pick. That's not a problem here. So that's first thing to consider. The other thing to make sure that you're looking at is the fact that a lot of the various modern cloud applications now are, and there's different terms that are used. Sometimes it's called HTAP, Hybrid Transaction Analytic Processing. There's other terms used, but what they're talking about here is a melding of the operational workloads, where the transactional workloads, the analytical workloads, the search workloads are really becoming one. So as an example, let's say you've got a fraud detection microservice. Your credit card's being swiped, and it's got to either affirm or deny that transaction. So the transaction's going through, it has to then go and look up some perhaps buyer history on myself to see exactly what my buying history is, if it's matching up with the locations, the types of products I'm buying, all of that type of thing. It then has to do a very quick analysis to determine, again, whether it's in or out of bounds, and then it has to very quickly circle back to the application to signal whether the transaction is accepted or denied. And it has to do this in micro milliseconds at times. And so that's where the blending of these operational workloads comes into play, and you want to have your data layer be able to support that type of integration very, very well. Some do so in an integrated fashion like we do. Some do it by separating out. They'll have transports that go to, let's say, an Apache Spark cluster to do some of the analysis. We can support that as well. And with the network improvements, that's becoming more possible than it was in the past. All right, so now you've gone past the opportunistic, the standardized phases, and now you're beginning to get into the more rationalized phases where you're really beginning to get the hang of the hybrid or the multi-cloud type of design. You find that you're now beginning to use the microservices and other smart development methods so that you're not multiplying applications and data silos. But what's happening now is because you're beginning to have more shared data, you're getting additional data demands. And what we've seen customers do here to mitigate issues is to establish a center of excellence within the company that deals with the particular technology in question. So you would have a team located at a particular large enterprise that would focus on, let's say, DataStax Enterprise or a similar technology, and they're able to very quickly and smartly respond to these different and numerous now incoming data requests from all the different lines of business throughout the enterprise as this technology continues to roll out through the enterprise and more multi-cloud, hybrid cloud applications are being developed. And so in this phase, you're really beginning to realize now some of the true benefits from multi and or hybrid cloud deployments. So you're seeing speed increases in terms of taking your concept to actual production. You're beginning to iterate very well with the various internal teams in terms of delivering the application and learning from mistakes as well as successes, and the communications are beginning to now improve so that there's not a lot of guesswork or confusion in terms of understanding where things are. Now I want to pause on this particular tip because I have seen a lot of people get into trouble here. When it comes to, especially to moving to a cloud database, whether it is a database as a service or just a deployment in the cloud of a particular database that you're using for hybrid or multi-cloud purposes, make sure that you know your data access patterns of your particular application. In other words, is it write intensive? Is it read intensive? Is it a combination of the two? Is it an IoT application where you're just flooding tons of data in, but there's not a lot of read activity, or it's more of an analytic type of read activity? This is where, again, if you don't understand how your particular database provider charges in the cloud, you can really end up being burned. And I literally, when I will have customer calls during certain days, I will pick up the phone and I will talk to one customer and they will tell me, I am moving to the cloud to save money. And we will talk about the reasons why they're doing that and how it's going to be deployed and how that's going to work for them. I will then hang up the phone, and in my next customer call, that other customer will tell me, I'm moving from the cloud to save money. And they will tell me about how the cloud bit them because they didn't understand how they were going to be charged in the cloud, and their particular data access patterns didn't really lend themselves to the particular cloud deployment and how that vendor charged for it. So if you don't want to get a surprise at the end of the month when you open up your cloud bill, make sure that you understand your data access patterns, how your vendor charges, because the fine print matters. When you look at the various database providers, read through how they charge in the cloud because they will differ sometimes wildly between each other. Or you can choose a vendor that charges in a uniform fashion. And that's the route that we've decided to go down here at DataStax. So currently, we don't charge any differently in the cloud than on-premise. Do you want a yearly subscription? Great, you can buy it, get a nice discount for doing that, run in the cloud on-premise, no problem. Do you want to run in a on-demand fashion? In other words, you just want to pay for what you use? whether it's on-premise or in the cloud, and be billed monthly. You can do that as well. And there's not going to be any difference or surprises when you open that bill, because it's, again, a uniform way of charging for that. So that's just kind of how we've done things up until now. Might change as we begin to introduce more database as a services, and we'll begin to complement what we have today. But again, that's the route that we've gone down. But again, I do want to make sure that I spend a little bit more time here and call this out, because I have seen a lot of people get that monthly surprise, and you want to avoid it if you can at all possibly do so. Lastly, wrapping up, optimize. This is the tweaking phase. So boy, you've got some success under your belt, and now there's just a few tweaks that you need to make to really just run this thing the way it's supposed to be done. This is where you're really experiencing a lot of the benefits that hybrid and multi-cloud bring to the table. Of course, you've got to stay up to date with the various changes in the technology, the innovation increases that are occurring. But by and large, you've kind of got things well in hand. You're in the saddle and running well. And this is where you're seeing, again, like I said, the benefits that you would hope to realize at the very beginning. So if you're looking to do some digital transformation, you're seeing your applications now be more modern, be able to satisfy your customers in ways that they really couldn't do it. You're experiencing better agility. You're able to experiment more simply and more cost effectively. You're getting your applications to market much faster and seeing very happy customer experiences, and you're beginning to see a decrease in the amount of administrative and management burden that you maybe had, as well as really see some efficiency in terms of your costs, in terms of uniformity, and just avoiding some of the accidental spends maybe that you had in some of the prior steps. Let's talk about one of our customers here at DataStax, again, that has done this really well, Macys. So Macys, I think most of you know Macys, big store in terms of just kind of a consolidation in terms of offering a variety of different things. Macys department stores years ago were hurting. They were feeling the pressure from the various web retailers, especially Amazon. And there was some questions whether Macys would continue as an actual corporate entity. But then Macys began to look at web, mobile, e-commerce very, very seriously. They began to take steps to deliver their products and services to their customers in an e-commerce and mobile style fashion. And today, this was taken back in May here of this year. Just a snippet from this particular article talks about how mobile remains Macys' fastest growing channel now for its sales growth, double-digit increases. So Macys is back in business and doing very, very well in our e-economy. And Macys did this through a smart deployment of hybrid and multi-cloud using DataStax Enterprise. So in the opportunistic phase, they began with DataStax Enterprise primarily because they understood the need to have continuous uptime and being able to replicate the data between multiple geographic locations, keep it close to their data, their customers rather, in those locations. So they began in that phase, established the microservices architecture that we talked about earlier so that they could really work well with the different components that made up their e-commerce platform. Then they began to understand how they were going to handle certain times of the year or certain events where they needed stronger amounts of scale and or insurance of availability, and began to really now solidify their choices of their technology components that use DataStax Enterprise, such as the inventory catalog data that they're still using today, that's all backed by DataStax Enterprise. And now today they've tweaked their system so that it's just running very, very seamlessly and quietly, both on multi-cloud and on-premise, so in a hybrid fashion, and they're really able to deliver their applications very, very quickly to market. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap up here. I mentioned earlier that DataStax, we do very well in the cloud, and for good reason. Again, the masterless architecture is primarily why our customers, we're seeing greater than 60% of our customers are running us in the cloud for all the different types of things that I described earlier. One thing I didn't touch on was the management ease that we have in the platform, and again, that a masterless architecture brings to the table for things such as, let's say, software patch upgrades. As an administrator, I dreaded doing major upgrades to my database. But in our platform, let's say you're running a particular database and you have software and nodes running on all 3 cloud providers and on-premise. You can do your upgrade in push-button fashion across all those different environments, all those different cloud providers in an automated fashion where you don't have to worry about it. It's going to upgrade in an online way. You're on-premise first, maybe your Amazon next, your Azure third rather, and then on to the GCP and Google fourth. All while your application continues to run, continues to service your customers with no downtime whatsoever. That's one of the things that we offer that I think is just stellar in terms of management and making sure that your software is up to date. And I've talked about the differences here earlier in terms of being able to support all the different types of deployment models. And so here I really think that when you're looking at DataStax, we've got that type of flexibility that doesn't box you in, that makes sure you're not stuck in one particular style or having to go to multiple vendors, whether it's for different data management reasons or otherwise. And it's going to secure everything for you automatically. So if you want to create one of those intercloud databases that I talked about, you can do so with our Lifecycle Manager tool, and it is going to create a single database cluster that runs across however many clouds you'd like and ensures everything is secured automatically for you. You don't have to do anything special to make that happen to ensure that your sensitive data is protected. And so using this type of software and/or data layer, you're going to experience the various benefits of that continuous uptime, no reason to have the various data silos that are separated. Instead, you can have multiple applications using one or more databases that can share information very easily within a single DataStax cluster, and you're not going to have any kind of cloud vendor lock-in where you're beholden to Amazon, you're beholden to Microsoft or something like that. You're going to be able to run anywhere you'd like and ensure that nobody can tell you what to do or charge you any differently than you would like. So for more information on what we've been talking about here today, I would like to point you to our website, datastax.com. You're going to find a variety of different resources, downloads. And with our downloads, I do want to call out one important fact, that if you're concerned about the costs of trying some of what we've talked about out, right? Know that you can download our enterprise product, DataStax Enterprise, and run it in a development environment for as long as you'd like, anywhere that you would like, at no cost. That means if you want to stand up a 500 node cluster on a single cloud provider on-premise, across cloud providers and on-premise, you don't owe us a dime until you are ready to go into production. And at that point, call us. We'll talk about our various subscriptions or on-demand offerings, and we'll get you started that way. But we ensure that when it comes to kicking the tires and getting started, we make it a very easy and cost-effective experience for you. So know that when you download our software, no time bombs, no restrictions, none of that type of thing that you'll be facing. And in addition to the downloads, we have our online documentation, our DataStax Academy, free online courses to take. We provide a lot of things that are upfront, free, that aren't going to cost you anything to get started with everything that we've been talking about here. All right, and with that, we have reached the end of the presentation of the webinar. Again, apologies for the fact that it wasn't running in full screen mode. So let me see if we have any questions that I need to tackle here. Let me get this set up a little bit better so I can see it a little bit better. Okay, let me just begin to work up through some of these questions. Can you share this among your contacts if anyone is looking for the services? I'm not sure what that is referring to, and I apologize for not understanding the question. Can you share this among your contacts who is looking for these services? So not sure what that is. Okay. One question on costs in terms of, again, so our software is run through a subscription basis where you can either buy a year subscription to the software for however many nodes you want, and we have both development and production styled subscriptions. You can pay that upfront, whether you're running in the cloud or on-premise. And then also we have on-demand pricing as well, whether it's on demand on-premise or in the cloud or a combination thereof. So you kind of get the best of both worlds with our software in terms of pricing. There's no surprises, no different ways of doing things. All right, it really looks like that. That looks like the end of the questions. So I think we are complete here. I'll turn things back over to the DZone guys for full wrap up.
Great, thank you so much, Robin. I'd like to thank you for the great presentation today. I would also like to thank today's sponsor, DataStax, for providing the audience with this great webinar. And lastly, thank you to everyone who attended today. We hope you learned something new that will help you in your developer career. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.